Psychiatrist Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, whose life-death transition workshops have become established in many parts of the world, has devoted her life to the care of the terminally ill. Through her pioneering work on death and dying, she has focused international attention on how best to help dying patients live life. Elisabeth, what was it that first motivated you to work for the dying?
I think the most impact in my very early life was my visit to Majdanek, a concentration camp where 960,000 children were put in the gas chambers. And you have to understand that I came from Switzerland, a country where I didn't go through any windstorms of life, and no poverty, and no wars, and no unemployment, and no race problems. And I was kind of protected in a very paradise-like world with loving parents and all the material things that anybody ever needs. And I did relief work in post-war Europe. And then you stand in front of a gas chamber and inside a concentration camp with the smell and the horror of it. It's very different believing those stories and actually knowing that this took place. And to see trainloads of baby shoes of murdered children, or carloads of women's hair that was taken from victims to ship back to Germany to make cloth out of it, that really did something to me. My interest was not death and dying. It was the question, what do we do wrong to our children? In my opinion, they're all perfect and they're absolute angels and they're wise and beautiful. And by the time they grow up, they're capable of killing thousands of innocent children. And the paradox that bothered me, that I tried to figure out, is how come men and women like you and I are capable of killing thousands of innocent children, and the same day we worry about our own children at home with chickenpox. And then a very young Jewish girl looked at me and as if she could read my mind. She said, you too would be capable of doing that. And I wanted to say, no, not me. I'm much more pestalozzi than a Hitler. But I couldn't say it because for the first time in my life, I understood the American Indian saying, never judge your fellow man unless you have walked in his moccasins for a mile. It just dawned on me, I've never been hungry, how can I judge what I would do if I would be starved? Do you understand?
Are you saying there's a Hitler in all of us?
Yes.
And that you have to in some way work that out? And
you have to become honest again and acknowledge your own negativity and face it and get rid of it. And then all of us are capable of becoming Mother Teresa.
Generally speaking, do conventional attitudes face up to what the dying person really needs?
I don't think so. Things have changed a lot in the last 20 years, but when I started my work, it has been terrible. Patients are not told the truth. We are telling them stories. We use disguises. We even lie to them. And we very often leave them alone, in a back hall at the last room at the hallway. In Switzerland, they used to put them in the bathrooms and close the doors, and nobody was with them.
Should you tell a person if he's dying or terminally ill?
My belief is that every human being knows before they're dying. They know it internally, not necessarily intellectually, but their intuitive spiritual quadrant is totally aware of it. We have verified that 1,000 times with dying children. What I'm trying to teach is not to go around and say you're dying or you have 1 week to live. That's very cruel. But to hear and to listen what the patient tells you. And when the patient is ready, she or he will ask you, how long is it going to be, or things like this. Or I'm not going to be here at Christmas, for example. If you cannot accept that reality, you say, oh, Grandma, don't talk like this, you're going to make it, and all you have to do is eat, and you'll be fine. And Grandma just shakes her head and turns away from you and knows that you can't hear her. All my patients tell me it's not the other way around. And when they acknowledge it, they're verified. And then I ask them, is there anything I can do for you? And it's very simple. You're not supposed to be mind readers. All you have to do is to be humble enough to ask, and they tell you what it is that they need. But you have to teach more people the symbolic language. The symbolic language is the language of the spiritual quadrant that reveals to you the internal knowledge of 5-year-old dying children or of a 100-year-old man.
Before we get on to the spiritual aspect, Elisabeth, Can you tell us what you believe about the use and the need for all the highly sophisticated medical technology that's available to keep people alive? Do you consider that we should, or that we owe it to the dying to try to keep them alive for longer than they would?
If you hear the patient's communication, not necessarily in plain English, your patient will tell you exactly when it is time to call it quits. And if you can hear the patient and really accept where they are at, not where you want them to be. Some patients want to prolong their life ad infinitum. They are not ready to let go. And you try to gratify the patient's needs, not your own needs. If you have a young person in a car accident where there is a chance of a functioning life, I would be the first person to use every equipment and machine. But I'm very appalled when patients die of cancer after years sometimes of suffering. They have finished their unfinished business, they're ready to make the transition, and then when their heart stops, they come and pound on it and try to prolong that life for another 2 or 3 months. That is very cruel to me. The art of medicine is to know when to use the gifts we have in medicine, and then also to know when to stop.
If a patient says to you, "Help me to die," what do you say to him?
You never shorten life. You do not use active euthanasia. That is a no-no. But I try to find out why it's so unbearable to live whatever natural time they have left. And very often they're just bitter or resentful or unloved. They don't want to exist this way. Old people are put in nursing homes, tied down to a wheelchair, incontinent. Nobody talks to them. They don't want to live nor die. And then you help them to feel loved and wanted. And that's where my ET centers are coming in, that you bring in children and life and give them a feeling of being wanted and needed.
What's an ET center, Elisabeth?
ET center is a dream of mine, and I want to live long enough to make this a reality. I was very impressed by the movie E.T., and I love E.T., and E stands for elderly and T for toddlers. And I would like to bring those 2 generations together and leave the moms at home. You always skip a generation, then you have no frictions. And working parents bring their toddlers to this old age home where the old people are loved and treated like human beings with respect, with their own furniture, their own things. And the only payment they would have to make is to spoil 1 child rather. Not buy stuff, but put them on their lap. Tell them stories about good old England, Ireland, Scotland, wherever they came from. And they feel loved and wanted and needed. And if one day they're too weak to come down, a child would come upstairs and look for that substitute grandma or grandpa. And the mutual gift is enormous, because toddlers love wrinkled faces. They even like pimples. They play piano on them. And they hug them and hold them and touch them, and old people need to be touched more. And the old people, what they give the children is not only a safe, loving place, but they teach them for the first time very early in life what unconditional love is all about.
Elisabeth, at the bedside of a dying patient, apart from all the small talk, what is there to say?
You need to know that you don't always need to talk. Some people just love to have somebody who can hold their hand and sit in silence. And then when something comes up in a patient, then they will open up and talk. It's not what you talk or what issues you cover. It's that you are there with the patient, really there, not your mind on your business or your next appointment, or doctors have 20 patients waiting and they stand there, oh, you're doing fine today, and then they take off. That does not open up the chance of a really in-depth dialogue. If I have 10 minutes with a patient, and that happens very often, I come in and say, I have 10 minutes. And I sit down, and sometimes I say, shoot, when I know they're ready to just, like a dam burst. And they will tell me in 10 minutes what they need to take care of. And we can do it. But you have to be honest to even tell them how much time you're really with them. Not that you get impatient and irritable, and though they talk, you're already with your next patient. It's how much you are able, for very practical reasons, to be with the patient, and you have to be really with them. And the patient tells you what it is that they need.
If you could sum up what you have learned in more than 30 years of being with the dying, what would that be? What would you say?
They teach me what living is all about. I see many, many very successful people, especially physicians, who are very sad at the end of their life. Not bitter necessarily, but a terrible sadness. And I ask them, you know, what makes it so sad? And they have time for the first time. They take time out for themselves. And they say, I made a real good living, but I realize now that I've never really lived. That I became a doctor to please my dad or to please my mother. And if I reflect back on my life, I was raised all my life, I love you if. I love you if you bring good grades home. I love you if you make it through high school. God, would I love you if I can say my son a doctor? So I became a doctor, but I really wanted to be a carpenter or a dancer or something else. And at the end of life, they realized that they never, I call it, they never listened to their own drummer. They always pleased somebody else, and in the process of it, they missed living.
Much has been made of the stages that you describe a person goes through when they die. What are those stages, and are they always the same for each person?
No, the stages have nothing to do with dying. I really learned them from parents of multiple handicapped children, but nobody asked me to write a book at that time. I noticed that when people go through any loss, it could be a divorce, your house can burn down, maybe a child is dying, or maybe you expect a healthy, wonderful baby, and then you realize it's a severely handicapped mongoloid child or blind child. Any time you face a loss, human tendency, and that depends on how you were raised and your whole lifestyle, is first to have a state of shock and denial. You don't want to believe that your child is not healthy and normal or blind. You don't want to believe that you actually have MS or cancer or AIDS or whatever. Then, depending on your personality and how much help you get, without being pushed, you go through tremendous anger. You get angry at the doctor for not telling you that there is a high risk that you have a not healthy child, or you have had a physical 6 months earlier and nobody discovered that you're full of cancer. If a child dies in an accident, your anger can be at the alcoholic driver who killed your child. It's not always rational. It's just anger at God, anger at the world. You're angry at any mother who walks around with a healthy child. If you accept the anger and do not judge it or blame or evaluate what this anger is all about, just help them to express it without judgment. Then they move on very quickly to bargaining. Bargaining is most of the time with God. If you let me live long enough until my children get out of school, I'll be a good Christian, or I go to synagogue, or I go to Mass every day. What they promise they never keep, because the day the children are out of school, they had a quickie prayer until they get married, and when they're married until I become a grandmother. The bargaining time is a wonderful time for us health care givers, because the patient is not so angry and not so depressed that they're hard to work with. It's not peace, but it's a temporary truce. During that time, you should help them finish unfinished business. It's a wonderful gift for the patient and for the family and the staff. Then they go through two types of depression. First, reactive depression. They mourn all the little deaths, like they can't keep a job, they can't plant the geraniums anymore or the garden in the spring, they can't cook, they can't eat by themselves, they can't wash themselves. Every loss, it's a little death. And the more little deaths people experience, the more they're ready for the final death. They need to be allowed to grieve and to talk, and sometimes they marinate in self-pity, but you do need to help them to get those tears out and not say, oh, it's going to be all right, because it's not going to be all right. If they are allowed to express the anger and the grief, then they go through a silent period, and that is unbearable for a lot of staff and family members. They don't want to eat, they don't want to have visitors, they want to put the sign up, leave me alone. And the worst thing that you can do if you're a nurse, and the man has stopped eating breakfast, and you come in with a breakfast tray, and they haven't touched it, and you say, Mr. Smith, how will you ever get strong if you don't eat your breakfast? Well, that's nonsense, because Mr. Smith knows he's very shortly before death, and it's a real weaning off to deconnect from the world. You should not bug them to eat and to do this and that. If you can tolerate this silent grief, which is very unbearable for some people, and know that this is an incredible blessing, because only if you go through the weaning off process do you find real peace and acceptance. And wives or husbands have the worst time, and counselors need to know that, and doctors and clergy and nurses. Many times a wife comes and says, Dr. Ross, my husband doesn't want to see me anymore. What did I do wrong? What did I, what was my sin that in the last days of his life he doesn't want to see me anymore? They need to know that patients can only say goodbye, symbolically speaking, if they have no unfinished business. That's a gift and a blessing. And then when they go through the silent grief and they're accepted this way, then they reach a stage of acceptance. And that is not a joyful, glorious, oh, I'm finally, at the threshold. That is simply an acceptance of something inevitable, and it is associated with more and more peace. The difference to that is very often in nursing homes, people never reach acceptance. They go through resignation, and that's a bitter giving up. They linger on, they don't live, they don't die. And that you see not only in dying, families of dying patients go through the same thing. Staff who dares to get involved. In a divorce, you go through the same thing. Every loss. The trouble with people who read my books is that they expect the patient to go from stage 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. And I said, that's ridiculous. We're not robots. This is just a general outline. Sometimes nurses open a door of a cancer patient and they see she's very angry. They don't talk to the patient. They don't even go into the room. They go to the chart and write patient in a stage of anger. Maybe the food was miserable and you should talk to the dietitian. It has nothing to do with stage of anger.
Ever since your experience at the Majdanek concentration camp, you've attached a lot of importance to what we can learn from dying children.
Yes.
What is their message?
Dying children are the wisest, best, and most incredible teachers. Last night we had those 3 children here, and you watched them and you saw how much smarter they are than grown-ups. They have an internal wisdom that we don't give enough credit to. Many times I have children with cancer, a brainstem tumor, or whatnot. And I know that the 5-year-old child doesn't know that language, brainstem tumor. If I listen to them and I do not come to them with a knowledge of a grown-up who knows up here that you can't talk to a child about brainstem tumor, and I simply sit with them and listen to them, they look at you and they know you better than your own psychiatrist. I mean, they know if you're a phony baloney, they know if you're open, they know that they can share with you stuff they can't share with mommy and daddy. And that's where it comes in, that you need to learn the language of dying patients.
You speak often of the symbolic language that children use.
Yeah. Dying patients, young and old, use basically 3 languages. Plain English in England. If a dying patient says to you, I know I'm dying in a very short time, and there is nothing anybody can do for me, unless they're chronically depressed pessimists, you better listen to it because they know internally. Children use very rarely plain English because we are not in a habit talking with 5-year-old children about their actual death. That is much too unacceptable to us grown-ups. They use the language of the spiritual quadrant. My main tool with children are spontaneous drawings that Carl Jung taught us about. And if you read a very spontaneous picture, what I do is I give children a plain white piece of paper and a box of Crayola, which has to include white, not the small boxes. And you simply ask them, draw me a picture. They draw, and in 5 minutes, latest 10 minutes, you know that these children know that they have a brain tumor. They even know if it's left or right-sided. Not know here, but know here. And they don't know up here what they're drawing. But in the picture is where mommy is at, where daddy is at, how they see the siblings coping with it. Very often it tells you how long they are aware they still have to live. And for me, the most beautiful concept is how they share with you what their death is like. And my role, I think, in life has always been a catalyst. I don't run institutions, I don't run hospices, but I'm planting seeds. And what I do with moms and dads of dying children is to tell them that their children know internally, and stop telling stories to them, stop telling them they're going to get well, when the child tries to tell you that they know they're not going to live. And then there is much more open communication. And many, many children literally hang around to help the parents to find peace and acceptance, and then they can let go.
In your experience, do potential suicides use this hidden language?
I think there is very rarely a suicidal patient, unless they have an acute psychotic episode, then it's very difficult to find because they don't know what they do at the time. It can be a very impulsive act. My average suicidal teenagers, and there's an enormous percentage of suicidal children. We have worked with children from 5 to teenage years, and it's in many places the second and third cause of death among our children from 5 years on. Suicidal teenagers very often leave a collage instead of the drawings. They work intensively on collages evening after evening, and then they try in a disguised language, like Jesus used parables. That's also a typical example of symbolic language. They show mom or dad this collage, or they fiddle around so long at dinner time and mom calls for dinner, and they procrastinate in order to bring mom to their bedroom so she should see the collage. They use all sorts of gimmicks to be sure that somebody in the family sees it. And then mother screams at them and never looks at it, and then they commit suicide, and afterwards they look at the collage, which tells you everything. Their pain of their childhood, maybe their abuse. We have 25% of our grown-ups in our workshops are raised with sexual abuse and incest. With so much pain. And if you could have children very early, hopefully before first grade, draw a picture instead of the stupid IQ test, which gives them already a inferiority or superiority complex, and would have somebody who knows how to read picture. You could early diagnose, do lots of preventive psychiatry and medicine, and you would already know in first grade which child has been sexually, physically, or emotionally abused, and you could heal them.
What does this teenager's collage tell you about her? This was a suicide.
This is a 15-year-old girl who was found dead with this collage under her. And she tried to show this collage to mom and to dad, and they didn't look at it. Then she even brought it to the social worker. And the social worker said, very nice, but never looked at it. And if she had looked at it, she would know the whole life history of this girl. Can I read it very briefly? This child not only used symbolic non-verbal language with pictures, but to be sure that she's understood, she also used plain English words. This is her past. She uses an unusual technique, not only non-verbal, she also adds words. This is her past, the left lower quadrant. Suffering child needs your help. She views her life in the past as a very scary, lonely ocean without any help, without lighthouse, boat, piece of wood to hold on to. The right upper quadrant reveals your now. And she is afraid she's going crazy now. She questions why. Make friends with mommy, and her images are a mommy dog with puppy dogs, a family, love. A baby who clutches a teddy bear to his chest. And this is a very interesting picture. That's a monkey who monkeys around. And they are identical with clowns who clown to cover up their sadness. In terms of prognosis, a good outlook because she can still use humor to cover up. That is prognostically a good sign. Then in tomorrow, she knows she has to fight to be free. She is totally aware she has to make a terribly tough choice. Again, the desire to be free. This can be a sunset or a sunrise, and it's the same because if we have a sunset here, there is a sunrise on the other end. You see the same monkey again. This is like in a week from now. This is the immediate future. Yeah. The same monkey, same clothes, same thing, but here he has stopped monkeying around. He's stiff, stilted, he can no longer clown. This picture is very relevant because it's a tree, a forest that has been chopped down, are already half dead. still some new growth coming in the future. That means there was still a little chance to help her if somebody would have read the collage here. If you want to know the outcome of what this girl internally knows, this girl knows everything. This is the far future. The biggest picture is a birth of a baby in a hospital, obviously. A doctor holding a baby upside down, that means the baby didn't breathe. She already knows or hopes that when she's found, she will not be breathing, and she hopes that the doctor will get to her and bring her back to breathing. If this is not possible, the next biggest picture is a cat. Cats symbolize 9 lives. I do not know her background. All I know is that she contemplated that if this is not happening, maybe there is some truth to it that we have more than 1 life. Very significant, the smallest picture, and this is the only one black and white on the whole collage, is a lighthouse. And that means her hope for the light at the end of the tunnel when she dies. This is how you read pictures. If somebody would have looked at it, they might have been able to help her.
Elisabeth, I'd like to talk now about a favorite concept of yours, your concept of unconditional love. What is it?
It's the acceptance of you as a human being where you are at, not where I want you to be. If you can practice unconditional love, as a physician, for example, with a terminally ill patient, you recommend a treatment of choice, chemotherapy that you think really works with this type of cancer, and you see the patient's facial reaction that they throw back or their face drops, then you tell them, think about it, I will ask you in 1 more week again, so you have time to think about it. I'm not pushing my needs onto you. The next time you tell them all the pro and contra and the side effects and the costs and everything and the loss of hair and the vomiting, but also statistically the chances that you would have if you take it. And the patient is still unhappy. A doctor who practices unconditional love would then say something like this: I will ask you 1 more time. You never ask anybody more than 3 times. But one thing you need to know, if you do not choose my recommended treatment, you need to know that I will still take care of you. That is practicing unconditional love.
But you've even talked about loving Adolf Hitler. Isn't that going a bit over the top?
No, if you learn enough about life and unfinished business and why we become the way we are, then instead of judging and blaming and labeling somebody and criticizing them and knocking them, you try to understand where they come from. And I think, I've been in a concentration camp and I've seen the horrors he created. But if you detach yourself a bit from the nightmare and try to see how he was raised and how he was beaten and what kind of a childhood he had, then you begin to understand that there were millions of people who fed into his negativity. And he's not the only one. He was the outcome of a lot of negative conditioning.
In your workshops, people go up in front of 70 or 80 other people onto a mattress and they beat telephone directories to a pulp with a rubber hose. What's all that about?
It sounds very cruel, but it's the biggest blessing. When you get in touch with your Hitler, like somebody looks at you funny and you could strangle them, and everybody has some people that they feel this way. You try to get in touch where that comes from, and you really don't know. If you externalize your hate, your revenge, your negativity in a very physical way without knowing even up here where it comes from, as you express your rage and your hate and your anger, and the best thing is a telephone book because it flies in 100 pieces and it doesn't hurt anybody, it doesn't cost much either. As you express your rage and anger, the understanding follows behind it, and suddenly you hear yourself talk about stuff that you have repressed for 45 years, and you get in touch where it comes from. And it's such a relief. And then you begin to correlate the original trauma when you were 5, 6 years old. You were misused or sexually abused, or your stepfather beat you to a pulp, and you let your impotent rage out that you had when you were 5 and 6 years old, and he was a big, powerful, very nasty man, and you let him have it. And then as you get all your negativity out, then later on at the end of the workshop, when you begin to understand where he also came from, then you're able to love him to some degree, not like a saint, but you're able to forgive him for what he did to you. And you also learn that through all the windstorms of life, you have grown enormously in understanding and compassion.
Do you acknowledge other ways of achieving the same result, or is yours the only way?
Oh no, there are 100,000 ways that lead to Rome. This is my favorite way. We work with 100 people, usually in 5 days, and 92% have a positive permanent life change. It's economically, it's a brief workshop in 5 days for 100 people, much more economical than long-term therapy, where you only talk. It just takes much too long for average people.
You mentioned concentration camps. Can we turn to something in the present that is creating just as much of a sense of horror, and that is the AIDS pandemic? How do you regard this?
You know, we have had so many nightmares. We have not learned much from World War I. We have not learned much from World War II. We've learned very little from Vietnam, from Biafra, from Ethiopia, from all the wars we have all over the world. But at that time, it was very easy. You can switch the radio on, and you see these starving children with a big bloated bellies, and you send £100 or $100 check, and your conscience is soothed. You can switch it off, and then you can go to a fancy dinner. If we don't learn, we have to be hit with a 2x4 over the head, and I think AIDS hits all of us with a 2x4 over the head, because they're right in our neighborhood, and they're in our own house, in our own family sometimes. And to me, AIDS is a last gift from God to open our eyes and our heart. This is a time of the separation of the wheat from the chaff. You have to make a stand. You cannot be neutral anymore. You cannot just send a check and close your eyes and it doesn't happen. If you make your choices based on love, and you serve your fellow man and you help your fellow man, and you do not make your choices based on fear, then you'll be blessed 1,000 times. If you become paranoid about AIDS patient and you curse them and you blame them and you even regard it as a punishment from God, and you should put them all in another concentration camp or isolate them or put them on an island and forget about them, like we did with the leprosy patients, you cannot escape your own fears, and you will become so paranoid. We have people in my community where I wanted to open an AIDS baby hospice that when they drive by the farm, they hold their breath. They don't want to breathe the air because they're afraid they're getting it. They're afraid to drink the water. They're afraid to take change in the shop where I shop because it may have AIDS virus on it. They're going to get sick. And to me, this is our challenge. If we are finally learning a lesson, love thy fellow man, without any ifs attached to it. And if we can do that, then we can pass the test. And if we cannot do that, it's going to destroy us.
What do you do with the threats and the negativity that come your way as a result of your work with AIDS?
Sometimes it's hard not to become negative. They try to burn my farm down, and they put nails and glass pieces in my driveway, and they present me with the fact that I will have a hunting accident during hunting season. I always have to remind myself that people are not bad, they're just petrified. And if I can stick it out long enough, then they begin to see that I still love them and I still lend them I have lots of hay this spring, and all my neighbors ran out of feed for the cattle. And I happen to have 2,100 bales of hay, and I was delivering loads of hay to them, and they couldn't believe it because they were really nasty with us. And now they're slowly turning and coming back to us, first when they need something and later on even for other reasons. And a year and a half after, they wanted to lynch me, and we had to go back home from our community meeting with police escort. A year and a half later, they asked me if I could teach about AIDS in their high school. And that's a 160-degree change. And if you stick it out, and it's very important that you don't become negative, because negativity can only survive on negativity. And if you keep in mind that they're not bad, they're just frightened, you will win, because love is always stronger than hate.
I'd like to explore this a little more, though, Elisabeth. How can you say that AIDS is a gift from God? What consolation is that to the person with AIDS?
You see, my purpose is not to go around and putting band-aids on people and consoling them. I just feel, and I'm very convinced of that they chose to have this disease, and many of them, to die from it, to raise the consciousness of mankind, to give you a last chance to show that you have love in you, that you can serve and that you can help. It's the last catalyst that some people need to change their ways from negativity to positive.
Was this a conscious choice they made? Surely not.
No, this is, I believe that we choose what we contribute to mankind during the time we are on Earth. I always said, half serious, half jokingly, depending where people are at, that who we are is a gift from God to us. And what we make out of our life is the gift that we bring back home after graduation, after we die. And I believe that they chose that to raise the awareness and the consciousness or the love level of mankind. This is a great sacrifice and a great gift.
Your attempt to start a hospice for AIDS babies has been frustrated. Will you persist with that work?
No, I will not insist that I have to have an AIDS baby hospice on my land, because that would only add more negativity and more negativity. And you cannot fight negativity with adding more negativity. I simply have to accept that this community is not ready for it. Doesn't mean I give up the dream and idea of a baby hospice. What I did is I wrote to people, and we have 25,000 people I have worked with, parents who have lost a child 5-10 years ago. I wrote to everybody and asked if they wanted to make a contribution by adopting or taking in as a foster child 1 or 2 of those AIDS babies. And we received 27 families who are willing to take 1 or 2, so I'm trying to find private foster homes now. I've been very successful. The problem is to get the babies out of the hospitals. That has been the other problem. And in a very materialistic society, if you get $1,000 a day for a baby, I have had a 2-year-old child who has been locked up in a hospital for 8 months. The child does not need a hospital, but the hospital gets $240,000 in 8 months. And on top of it, they get research grants as long as they do bone marrows and tests on these babies. And I think those children need a patient advocate who stands up for them and say what's enough is enough.
A lot of your thinking is radical, to say the least, and you've certainly had your share of critics. Where does your certainty come from?
I just know certain things and I get help. I always get help. If I need help, I ask, and some miracle happens and I get the answer and I get what I need.
You don't believe in coincidences?
No. I call it divine manipulation. I've had such incredible miracles happen to me. Every time I'm at the deepest bottom of despair or loneliness or whatever, if I ask for what I need, not what I want, what I need, it happens instantly. My best example is when I was at San Francisco Airport after 3 days of lectures, and I'm ready to catch the very last plane to California to go to Europe the next morning. I have 1 night to repack, do the laundry. It's 5 minutes before the plane leaves. And everybody wants, another information, another something. And somebody pulled my blouse and says, Dr. Ross. And all I wanted to say, no, my name is Mary Smith. I didn't say that, but I obviously wasn't, yes, what can I do for you? This woman knew that instantly, and she said very quickly and very frantic, in October we lost our only son, 9-year-old boy of cancer. And 2 weeks after the funeral, our 11-year-old daughter was diagnosed to be totally full of cancer. No treatment possibility, nothing. And all we do now is go into her bedroom and we scream at her, we yell at her, we blame her for not allowing us even time to mourn for the death of our only son. And they know up here that this is horrible, but they can't help it. What she really said in plain English, we really need help. It's not just an autograph or something superficial. And I wanted to help this young couple so badly, but I knew if I would do that, I would miss my plane and I wouldn't get to the workshop in Europe. And all I said in my thoughts, very quietly, God, if I only had 1 hour, right here, right now, that's all I would need. I swear in 30 seconds the loudspeaker came on. What impressed me most, it was in a very matter-of-fact voice, Flight 83 is delayed by 1 hour. And that's symbolic non-verbal language. We sat on the floor, we had an hour to take care of what we needed to do. I still made the plane, and that's what happens to me every day of my life. If you don't get an answer, it means you don't need it, you only want it. Or what I also find we don't teach enough. Thy will, not my will. I have no problems with what took me 60 years to learn is that thy time, not my time. So maybe the timing is not right. But you always get what you need when you need it.
Elisabeth, we've talked about various aspects of death and dying. What about sudden death? Does that pose any special problems?
Yeah, we don't do well with sudden death because people don't have to prepare for the impending separation. And what we do worse is when a child is sent to an emergency room, we work frantically to save that life. Somebody comes out and says sorry, and then we sedate the family, especially the mothers, with Valium. We do not sedate them, we sedate ourselves. They should be allowed to have a screaming room in the emergency room where they can express their turmoil. And the most important thing in sudden death especially, or almost exclusively, is that the next of kin are allowed to view the body. People who do not view the body stay in a partial denial for God knows how long. We have seen that at Vietnam veterans who were all shipped back from Vietnam in sealed caskets for medical hygienic reasons. I still now have parents who say, maybe this wasn't my son in a casket. Maybe he went to a war, or he went to the communists, or he has amnesia. And so it's very important to tell people in a sudden death, even if it's a terrible view, we cover the destructive part in a suicide, for example, or a newborn baby who is deformed head. We put the diaper over the head. And I always go in with the mother and said, hold your baby, touch it, this is your child. And then I leave them alone. I walk to the window in the same room. And as soon as I'm looking out of the window, which is an act playing really, then suddenly I hear, oh, isn't she beautiful? The moment I step away, they lift the diaper up and see this face, which to us may look horrible. To a mother it looks beautiful, and they say, doesn't she look like daddy or somebody? So it's very important, the viewing of the body.
How do you account for the remarkably high number of suicides among Vietnam veterans?
We have lost 100,000 men in Vietnam, and 200,000 have since committed suicide since they came back. And it's us who's responsible for that, and we really have to face how judgmental and cruel and inhuman we are to our fellow men. In Vietnam, we sent 17, 18-year-old young boys out to kill. We trained them as killers. They had nightmarish existences over there. They spent days on body counts to see which leg belongs to which corpse, to which arm, to which head. And then when they have really learned the gruesome aspects of life, they're shipped back without any help. They went on alcohol, they went on drugs, they couldn't find jobs. And we, the people in America, used to call them baby killers and pointed a finger at them and judged them as if they were the Vietnam War. They were not the Vietnam War. We sent them there. And many, many of them have come with suicides as their only solution. When they come to our workshops, and we try to really get as many to our workshops as possible, it's the first time many of them experience any form of love and acceptance. And to be sure they know that they're welcome back as human beings who stuck their neck out for their country, not by free choice, but they're 17 years old and they're sent there. At the end of the workshop on the first evening, the last evening, we make a circle with 100 people, and we put all the Vietnam veterans in the middle of the circle, and they don't know what's happening. And then we hold them together very close, and we sing America the Beautiful, and then everybody shouts, welcome back home. And they cry and sob, and we thank them for doing what they did for us. That does not mean an approval of the war, but an approval of them, human beings who stuck their necks out for us. And that's been very healing. We've had one suicide in 20 years after doing this ritual.
We've touched on the glimpses that you have had of realms outside of the physical, this physical reality. What about your own near-death experience? How much has that to do with where you are at spiritually?
Well, I've collected near-death experiences for many, many, many years, long before Moody's book came out and long before it was published, and very familiar words like near-death experience or out-of-body experience. And it was beautiful, and I knew that this is a reality. But to me, it's a big difference between believing 20,000 cases that you can repeat anywhere if you really want to, and between actually having the experience myself and knowing. And I say jokingly, my experience was more beautiful than all the 20,000 cases I collected. Once you have been in this light and seen this light and experienced this light at the end of the tunnel, symbolically speaking, it's such peace and such love that when you come back, it changes all your values, it changes the quality of your life, and they can hang you on your toenails and you still know that death does not really exist. It's just a transformation into a different form of life.
You have an orthodox scientific background, despite what has happened to you since. How do you reconcile that scientific aspect of you with something like the near-death experience?
It's no conflict at all, because I'm very skeptical, a square, straight Swiss, and all the experiences I had, I could not really comprehend how to put that in a scientific package. So what I did, very simple, is I tried to verify every aspect of it, like we are whole again when we leave our physical body. How can we be whole if my Vietnam veterans have had 3 extremities amputated? How can they have all their extremities? Why isn't this a projection of wishful thinking? See, I'm also a psychiatrist, so I always have a psychiatric excuse or explanation for it. But to verify it, I took blind people. Blind people with very critical criteria. They had to be blind for 10 years or more without light perception. I mean, really scientific. Very difficult to find cases, but I found a few cases of totally blind people who had a near-death experience, and I asked them what they saw at the moment of this near-death experience. They were able to tell me that you wear a black and white plaid, or I don't know what you call that, jacket, and the red sweatshirt and the white blouse, and what kind of frames eyeglasses you have, what kind of ring I have. Blind people can't do that. I know this is not possible. And my scientific colleagues say, oh, this is oxygen deprivation. And you know what I say to that. You can, every step of their experiences, you can verify, if you are open and want to. See, my belief is that we are not here to convince other people. I share what I know and how I verified it to my satisfaction. And those who can hear will hear, and those who do not hear, they will just be pleasantly surprised when they make their own transition.
Do you have a favorite example of a near-death experience, a case that said it all to you, that proved the case?
For me, you know, to verify that death does not exist and that those who passed on before us is again what we teach in our religious teachings, that, you know, they will wait for you in heaven and whatnot. But I need to verify that. And my favorite case is an American Indian woman who was hit by a hit-and-run driver and was lying on the side of the highway. Nobody stopped, everybody drove by. I must say in their defense that she didn't look externally injured. All her injuries were internal. One man stopped and asked her if there was anything he can do for her. And she said with great serenity, no, there is nothing else anybody can do for me. But this man did not leave. This woman was lying on the side of the road, unattended. And after a while, she looked at him and said, with the same kind of peace, maybe there is one thing that one day you can do for me. I have a mother on the Indian reservation, and if you ever get there, give her a message from me. And the message was, tell her that I was very okay, that I am very happy because I am already with my dad. And then she died in the arms of the stranger. And the stranger went 700 miles out of his way, and the Indian mother told him that her husband died 1 hour before the car accident of an acute, unexpected coronary 700 miles apart. And that gave me the basic answer how I have to continue my research, is to find people who are dying, who were not informed, who in the family died. And I used children in family car accidents who were not told that Mommy and Peter have died. And they always tell me the correct people. In 15 years, not one child mentioned the person who did not precede them in death. And there are 4, 5, 6-year-old children.
So, in just a few words, what is the value for the rest of us of the near-death experience?
If you have not had it, you can only believe what millions of people now begin to experience. But I think if people would know earlier in life that, number one, death is nothing to be feared naturally, but also that it depends a great deal how you live, and that the only thing that's really relevant and that counts is not how much money you stack away or how many titles you accumulate or doctor degrees. That may be partially important to you, but the only thing at the end of life, when you melt back into this slide from where we all came from, is how much service you have given to your fellow man and how much love you have been able to give and receive, with emphasis also that you have to learn to receive, because you cannot love others if you don't love yourself. For me, the hardest lesson in the world, but I finally learned it.
Does God have a sense of humor, in your opinion?
Oh, does he? Better than anybody else. We have to realize that life is supposed to be very simple and full of joy. And we are much too heavy. And once you get rid of your pain and your anguish and your hate and your rage and your revenge, then comes the joy and the peace and the love. That has always been there. It's just covered up with all the stuff.
What is the inspiration or the hope? What is the thing that keeps you going?
I think you have to learn. To me, this is always a challenge, because I'm forced to practice what I preach. And if I can not become negative, which is very tempting sometimes to just live, and to not love them. I mean, I don't love all these people who give me a hard time, but I'm trying to understand where they come from. And if you understand that they're not bad people, but they're just petrified, they're almost paranoid of fear. And my specialty all my life has been to help people get rid of their fear. And if I can practice that in my own community, with my own neighbors who give me a hard time, then I pass the tests. To me, these are tests to practice what you preach.
But in practical terms, how do you actually practice unconditional love for somebody you really don't like?
I work in my garden and put the whole present nightmare away and don't brood on it and dwell on it, because then I really get negative. I go and work in my garden for 2 hours, or I climb the mountain, then I go back and answer mail, and 9 out of 10 letters are beautiful, beautiful feedback letters. And that recharges my battery, and then I go can a bit or make preserves, so the very practical, grounded stuff, and then I can take the next avalanche again.
Can we learn to do this in one workshop?
I think you almost have to be a saint if you can learn that in 5 days. To me, this is a lifelong process. What we do in a workshop is to give people the tools and the awareness of how relatively easy it is, if they have the courage and the honesty, to look at their own negativity and get rid of it. 2 weeks after a workshop, your mother-in-law makes you mad. And that's the same test as my neighbors give me, to learn now how much you've learned. It's a lifelong process. But I must say, I'm 62 years old now, it becomes easier. If you get real old, it becomes very easy. But it's not always easy. I'm not promising a rose garden. You also have to get past the thorns.
Is it any consolation to a person with AIDS to say, this is a gift from God?
No, you see, I'm not the Band-Aid lady, and I'm not saying those things just to console them and make them feel good. To me, that would be phony baloney. But I really believe that from the depth of my heart, that it has been in all the prophecies that before the second coming there will be a separation of the wheat from the chaff. And the plague, the disease has been prophesied, not just in the scriptures, but Nostradamus, the Hopi Indians. I'm a big Indian fan, so I read the Hopi prophecies, and it's incredible. They predicted the First World War, the Second World War. They predicted what's happening now. And I think if we understand that God does not send us catastrophic events and illness and death and horrible things, but that all the things that we have to experience is a gift to us for our own growth and ultimately for the salvation of planet Earth. We have come this close to self-destruction of Mother Earth, of planet Earth. And this is the last chance, and you choose, it's your free choice whether you are going to belong to the wheat or to the chaff. And they help us to belong to the wheat. And they'll be the first wheat. If you learn one glimpse of love more this week than you had last week, then you're making progress and then you grow. And in Chantilly, we always say, should you shield the canyons from the windstorm, you would never see the beauty of their carvings. That's a beautiful symbolic language. And that means you don't have to try to protect other people from hardship, from illness, from death, from grief, from all the pain that this physical life brings. Because the physical life is a school where we are here solely to learn and to grow spiritually. And if you protect people and try to shield them and try to say nice things to them, you prevent them from growing. You don't have to worry about other people. You have to worry about your own growth and your own spirituality. And if you can get in touch with one glimpse of negativity, somebody makes you mad, get in touch where this comes from and get rid of it so that you do not let it out on living things.
So are you saying that whatever it is, AIDS or whatever, that we have to experience what we experience for our own reasons?
Yes, and it's not given to you as a punishment from God or as something horrible or nightmarish. It's given in love so that you have another chance to grow.
It's hard to cope with sometimes.
Yes, it is. That I acknowledge. I've gone through a lot of tough stuff, but I survived it and I've grown.
How do you view your own death?
Wonderful. I can graduate.